The morning sun rose slow and golden over the fields of New Providence. Elena Vasquez stood on her porch with a cup of coffee and watched the light spread across the farmland. 20 years ago, this world had been nothing but purple fungus and rocky hills. Now it was home to 3,000 people who had turned the alien soil into something beautiful. Elena was 62 years old. She had gray hair that she kept short and practical. She had been the colony administrator for 8 years, and before that she had been a lot of other things. Things she preferred not to think about on peaceful mornings like this one. The colony of New Providence sat on Kepler 442b, a small world at the very edge of human space. It was not an important colony. It had no rare minerals, no strategic value, no special technology. The people who lived here grew food, studied the local plants, and raised their families in quiet. The Terran Republic had actually scheduled the colony for gradual shutdown. Too far from Earth, they said. Too expensive to supply. Not worth the investment. Elena disagreed, but she understood the math. Still, she and her people had built something here. They would not leave easily. She finished her coffee and walked down to the main settlement. New Providence was not a large place. A few hundred buildings spread across a valley, connected by dirt roads and walking paths. There was a medical center, a school, a community hall, and rows of small houses with gardens. It looked like a farming village from old Earth, transplanted to an alien world. Thomas Okonkwo was already in his garden when Elena passed by. He was 68 years old, a tall man with white hair and hands that were still strong despite his age. He had been a soldier once, a long time ago. Now he grew tomatoes and beans and taught his grandchildren how to care for growing things. "Morning, Elena," he called out. "Morning, Thomas. How are the vegetables? Coming along. Should have a good harvest next month." He wiped dirt from his hands and smiled. "Assuming the supply ship ever shows up with those fertilizer compounds I ordered." Elena sighed. "About that. I got word last night. The ship is delayed again. 6 more weeks at least." Thomas nodded slowly. He did not seem surprised. "We'll manage. We always do." That was the thing about New Providence. The people here were used to managing. They were used to being forgotten, overlooked, considered unimportant. And they were fine with that. Most of them had come here specifically because they wanted to be forgotten. Elena continued her walk through the settlement. She passed Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who was 71 and ran the medical center. Yuki was tending to old Mrs. Patterson, who had twisted her ankle working in her greenhouse. Before coming to New Providence, Yuki had been a combat medic in 3 different wars. She had saved hundreds of lives on battlefields across a dozen worlds. Now she treated sprained ankles and common colds, and she was happy. She passed Captain Sandra Oyelaran, who was 65 and officially retired from the Terran Navy. Sandra spent her days monitoring the colony's weather satellites and teaching astronomy to the local children. She never talked about her years commanding warships, about the battles she had fought or the things she had seen. None of them talked about those things. That was an unspoken rule in New Providence. Everyone here had a past. Everyone here had done things that kept them awake at night sometimes. They had come to this quiet corner of the galaxy to find peace, to grow gardens, to watch their grandchildren play. They had earned that peace with blood and sacrifice. They did not want to remember. Elena reached her office in the community hall and sat down at her desk. There was paperwork to do, as always. Supply requests, maintenance schedules, reports to send back to Earth that nobody would read. She worked through the morning, handling the small problems of a small colony. It was just past noon when her communication console beeped with an urgent alert. Elena frowned and opened the message. It was from the colony's orbital sensor array, a simple system designed to track weather patterns and incoming ships. The message was short and alarming. 12 unidentified vessels had just emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were not broadcasting Terran Republic identification codes. They were heading directly toward New Providence. Elena sat very still for a moment. Then she pressed a button on her console and connected to the colony's emergency channel. "This is Administrator Vasquez. All department heads, please report to the community hall immediately. This is not a drill." Within 10 minutes, a dozen people had gathered in the main meeting room. Thomas Okonkwo, Yuki Tanaka, Sandra Oyelaran, the others who helped run the colony's essential functions. They were all old, all gray-haired, all supposedly retired from their former lives. They were also all completely calm. "We have visitors," Elena said. She displayed the sensor data on the wall screen. 12 ships, unknown configuration. They're not responding to standard hails. Based on the hull design, Sandra thinks they might be Vrix. Sandra nodded. The profile matches Vrix Dominion military vessels, scout class and light cruisers. If I had to guess, I'd say it's a raiding force. The Vrix, Thomas said slowly. They're about 300 light years from their usual territory. What are they doing out here? Looking for easy targets, Elena said. And we probably look very easy. The Vrix Dominion was a rising power in the galaxy. They were a reptilian species, cold-blooded in both body and temperament. They had been expanding their territory aggressively for the past decade, testing the borders of older civilizations. They had heard stories about humanity, about the so-called Death Worlders who had clawed their way up from a hostile planet to become a major galactic power. But stories were just stories. The Vrix had never actually fought humans before. "Do we have any military assets?" someone asked. Elena almost laughed. "We have one transport ship that's 40 years old and hasn't left orbit in 2 years. We have no weapons platforms, no defense grid, no garrison. On paper, we're completely helpless." "On paper," Thomas repeated. There was something in his voice that the others recognized. Something from a long time ago. The communication console beeped again. This time it was an incoming transmission from the approaching fleet. Elena opened the channel. A face appeared on the screen. It was reptilian, covered in dark green scales, with yellow eyes that held no warmth. The creature wore elaborate military insignia. "Human colony," the Vrix commander said. His voice was cold and precise. "I am Commander Thelvok of the Vrix Dominion. Your settlement is now under our control. You will surrender immediately and submit to capture. Your people will be taken for study and processing. You have 1 hour to comply. Any resistance will be met with complete destruction." The transmission ended. The room was silent for a moment. Then Thomas Okonkwo started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had hoped he would never have to do certain things again, and had just realized that hope was foolish. "Study and processing," he said. "They want to study us. They think we're helpless," Sandra said. "They see a small colony with no defenses, full of old people and children. They think they've found easy prey. They have no idea," Yuki said quietly. Elena looked around the room at her friends and neighbors, at the retired soldiers, the former Special Forces operatives, the ex-combat medics and naval officers who had all chosen this remote colony as their final home, at the people who had spent decades learning how to kill efficiently and had come to New Providence hoping they would never have to use those skills again. "No," she agreed. "They have no idea." She opened the colony-wide communication channel. Her voice went out to every building, every home, every corner of New Providence. "Attention all residents. This is Administrator Vasquez. We have visitors. A Vrix fleet is in orbit and has demanded our surrender. They have given us 1 hour." She paused. "You know what to do." Across the colony, people began to move. Elderly farmers walked to their equipment sheds. Retired soldiers opened hidden compartments in their basements. Grandparents told their grandchildren to go to the safety shelters and stay there until they were called. New Providence had no military garrison because it did not need one. The colonists themselves were the garrison. They had always been the garrison. They had simply hoped they would never have to prove it. Thomas Okonkwo walked back to his house and went down to his root cellar. His grandchildren were already heading to the community shelter with the other children. He had told them it was a drill. He hoped they would never learn the truth. In the cellar, behind a shelf of preserved vegetables, there was a hidden panel in the floor. Thomas opened it and looked down at what lay beneath. Military-grade weapons, ammunition, a powered exoskeleton that he had officially surrendered to the Terran military 40 years ago but had somehow never quite made it back to the armory. He looked at the old photograph on the wall, a younger version of himself in full combat armor, standing with his unit after the siege of Titan. He had been 28 in that photo. He had killed a lot of people that day. "Never thought I'd have to do this again," he muttered. Then he began to get ready. Above the colony, Commander Thelvok watched his tactical displays and felt satisfied. This would be a simple operation. These humans were weak, undefended, perfect subjects for study. He would bring them back to the Dominion in chains. and the Council would finally see that humanity's fearsome reputation was nothing but exaggeration and myth. He had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, his entire world would change. He had no way of knowing that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Commander Thelvok stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the scan results with growing satisfaction. The human colony below was even more pathetic than he had expected. No military vessels anywhere in the system. No orbital defense platforms. No shield generators protecting the settlement. The population appeared to be approximately 3,000 individuals, and thermal scans showed that most of them were old. Fascinating, he said to his second-in-command, Subcommander Rix. Their military reputation is clearly nothing but propaganda. Look at this place. They cannot even defend a simple agricultural colony. Rix was younger and more cautious. Commander, the humans are known throughout the galaxy as dangerous opponents. Perhaps we should proceed with more care. Dangerous? Thelvok made a hissing sound that passed for laughter among the Vrix. Look at the data. The average age of the colonists is 67 years. They are farmers and scientists. They have children and elderly dependents. This is not a military installation. It is a retirement community. But the stories about Earth, Reek said. The death world, the endless wars, the human ability to survive and adapt to any environment. Stories, Thelvok said dismissively. Every species has stories about how special and dangerous they are. The Vrix Dominion has expanded across 200 systems without ever losing a major engagement. We have conquered species that were supposedly unbeatable. These humans will be no different. He turned back to the viewport and looked down at the planet below. New Providence. Such a hopeful name for such a small and forgotten place. This colony will prove that humanity is overrated, Thelvok continued. We will capture these humans, study them, learn their weaknesses. When we return to the Dominion Council with living human specimens, we will show everyone that the so-called Death Worlders are just another soft species waiting to be conquered. Rix remained silent, but he was not convinced. He had read the intelligence reports about humanity. He knew about the wars they had fought, the impossible victories they had achieved, the way they refused to surrender even when all hope was lost. But he also knew better than to argue with Commander Thelvok. On the surface of New Providence, the hour was passing slowly. Thomas Okonkwo had finished assembling his equipment. The powered exoskeleton fit him like an old friend. Despite the decades since he had last worn it, the neural interface connected smoothly to his implants, the ones he had received during basic training 50 years ago. His body remembered the movements, even though his mind had tried so hard to forget. He looked at his hands, now encased in armored gauntlets. These hands had planted seeds and grown vegetables for 20 years. Before that, they had killed more enemies than he could count. Thomas, he turned to see Yuki Tanaka standing in the doorway of his cellar. She was wearing what looked like a medical coat, but Thomas recognized the armored weave in the fabric. She carried a small case that contained her medical nanites. Yuki, you ready? Ready as I'll ever be. She paused. I was hoping I'd never have to use these again. The combat applications, I mean. Thomas nodded. Medical nanites were miraculous things. They could repair damaged tissue, stop bleeding, save lives. But they could also be programmed to attack instead of heal. They could shut down nervous systems, paralyze muscles, stop hearts. Yuki had used them both ways during her years as a combat medic. None of us wanted this, Thomas said. But we're not going to let them take our home. Across the colony, other preparations were underway. Sandra Oyelaran sat in what everyone called the weather monitoring station. In reality, it was a sophisticated orbital control center disguised as civilian equipment. She was running diagnostics on the colony's satellites, the ones that officially tracked weather patterns and mapped atmospheric conditions. The satellites had other functions that were not in any official documentation. Kinetic projectile systems online. She muttered to herself. Targeting computers active, all platforms showing green. She smiled grimly. 40 years and these old birds still work perfectly. During her time in the Terran Navy, Sandra had commanded ships that could destroy entire cities from orbit. The satellite network above New Providence was much smaller, but it could still deliver a devastating surprise to anyone who didn't know it existed. In the medical center, Dr. Marcus Webb was organizing the emergency response teams. He was 64, a former trauma surgeon who had worked on the front lines of 3 interstellar wars. He had seen what combat did to human bodies. He had spent decades putting broken soldiers back together. All surgical bays are prepped, he reported to Elena over the communication channel. Though honestly, I'm hoping we won't need them. Our people are good. I know they are, Elena replied. But the Vrix have 1,200 soldiers heading our way. Even with our experience, there will be casualties. Probably, Marcus agreed. But I'm betting most of those casualties won't be ours. In the community hall, Elena Vasquez was coordinating the overall defense. She had a map of the colony displayed on her screen, showing the positions of every colonist who had reported ready for combat. The numbers were remarkable. Out of 3,000 colonists, over 2,000 were combat veterans of some kind. Some had been frontline soldiers. Some had been support personnel who had still received extensive combat training. Some had been Special Forces operatives whose records were classified even now. A few had been things that did not officially exist. The remaining 1,000 were mostly children, true civilians, or people who had chosen not to fight. They were already in the underground shelters that had been built into the colony's foundation. Officially, those shelters were storm cellars, protection against the violent weather that sometimes swept across the continent. In reality, they were hardened bunkers that could survive orbital bombardment. New Providence had been built by people who had learned to prepare for the worst. Administrator Vasquez, her communication console said, "The Vrix fleet is launching dropships." Elena watched the sensor display as 40 small craft separated from the orbiting warships and began their descent through the atmosphere. Each dropship carried 30 Vrix soldiers in full combat armor, 1,200 warriors in total, coming to capture a colony of elderly farmers. She opened a channel to Commander Thelvok's flagship. "Commander Thelvok, this is Administrator Vasquez. I want to give you one final opportunity to withdraw your forces. What you are about to do will not end the way you expect." The Vrix commander's face appeared on her screen. He looked amused. "Human Administrator, your concern for my soldiers is touching but unnecessary. Your colony has no defenses. Your people are old and weak. This conversation is over. You will surrender, or you will die. Those are your only options." "You're right that this conversation is over," Elena said. "But you're wrong about everything else. When your soldiers land, they will find that we are not what we appear to be. I am trying to save their lives, Commander. I am trying to prevent a massacre. Please listen to me." Thelvok hissed with contempt. "Human propaganda. You are trying to frighten me with words because you have nothing else. It will not work. In 30 minutes, my soldiers will be on the ground. In 1 hour, your colony will belong to the Dominion." The transmission ended. Elena sighed and closed the channel. She had tried. She had given him a chance. Now there was nothing left to do but wait. She thought about her own past, the years she had spent in Terran intelligence before coming to New Providence. She had done things during those years that she never spoke about. She had been very, very good at her job. When she retired, she had chosen this colony specifically because it was small and forgotten and peaceful. She had wanted to leave her old skills behind forever, but some skills never truly go away. She stood up from her desk and walked to her personal locker. Inside was a case she had not opened in 15 years. She opened it now and looked at the equipment within. Intelligence operative gear, silent weapons, electronic countermeasures, things that could turn an old woman into a ghost. "I really hoped I'd never have to use this again," she said to nobody in particular. Then she began to suit up. In his garden, Thomas Okonkwo took one last look at his tomato plants. They were coming along beautifully. With luck, he would be harvesting them in a few weeks. With luck, he sealed his helmet and activated his exoskeleton's combat systems. Around him, other colonists were emerging from their homes, their sheds, their hiding places. They looked like what they were: old people in mismatched armor, carrying weapons that should have been decommissioned decades ago. But Thomas knew better than to underestimate them. He had fought beside these people before, in wars that the galaxy had mostly forgotten. He knew what they could do when their homes were threatened, when their families were in danger. He knew the fire that still burned inside them despite their gray hair and wrinkled faces. The Vrix were about to learn the same lesson. Above the colony, the dropships continued their descent. 1,200 soldiers prepared for an easy victory. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Thomas looked up at the sky, at the dark shapes falling toward his home. 5 minutes, he said quietly. That's all we'll need. Then he moved to his position and waited for the end to begin. The dropships landed in perfect formation around the colony of New Providence. It was a textbook encirclement maneuver, exactly as Vrick's military doctrine prescribed. 40 landing zones, spread in a wide circle, cutting off all escape routes. The colonists would have nowhere to run. Squad leader Keth was the first to step off his dropship and onto the alien soil. He was a veteran of 12 campaigns, a loyal servant of the Dominion who had never questioned an order. His squad of 30 warriors followed close behind, their weapons ready, their armor gleaming in the afternoon light. The colony looked peaceful, empty. The buildings stood quiet, their doors closed, their windows dark. There was no movement anywhere. This is Squad 7, Keth reported over the tactical channel. We have landed at grid coordinates 4 to 7. The area appears deserted. No contact with enemy forces. Similar reports came in from all 40 squads. The humans had apparently fled or gone into hiding. This would be even easier than expected. All squads advance on the central settlement. Commander Thelvok, ordered from orbit. Secure all buildings. Any humans you encounter are to be captured alive for study. Move quickly and efficiently. Keth signaled his squad forward. They began walking toward the nearest cluster of buildings, their footsteps heavy on the dirt road. The silence was complete. Not even the local wildlife made a sound. Something felt wrong to Keth, though he could not say what. The emptiness was too complete. The silence was too deep. In his experience, civilians ran and screamed when soldiers arrived. They did not simply vanish. He pushed the feeling aside. These were just humans. Old, weak, helpless humans. There was nothing to worry about. 30 seconds after the landing, Keth's squad reached what appeared to be a farming storage building. The door was unlocked. Keth gestured for 2 of his warriors to check inside while the rest provided cover. The warriors never made it to the door. The ground beneath the squad suddenly collapsed. One moment they were standing on solid earth. The next moment they were falling into darkness, tumbling down into a pit that had been hidden beneath a thin layer of soil and artificial turf. It was not a natural pit. It was a tunnel, dug decades ago and rigged with seismic charges. The charges had been placed as mining equipment by colonists who claimed to be studying the local geology. They had been waiting underground for 20 years, ready to be activated. 40 of Keth's warriors fell into the collapsing earth. The tunnel was 30 meters deep, and the walls were lined with sharp metal debris. Most of them died on impact. The few who survived the fall were buried under tons of falling rock and dirt. Keth was one of the lucky ones. He had been standing at the edge of the squad formation, and he managed to leap backward as the ground gave way. He landed hard on stable ground and looked in horror at the massive crater where his soldiers had just been standing. "Contact!" he screamed into his communication system. "We are under attack. Squad 7 has suffered heavy casualties." All across the landing zone, similar scenes were unfolding. Squad 12 had entered what looked like an empty greenhouse. The moment they crossed the threshold, automated defense turrets dropped from the ceiling and opened fire. The turrets had been disguised as irrigation equipment. They were actually military-grade plasma projectors that the colonists had salvaged from a decommissioned warship decades ago. Squad 23 was advancing down a dirt road when the fence posts on either side suddenly extended and released a cloud of weaponized nanites. The microscopic machines swarmed over the Vrick soldiers, penetrating their armor through the breathing vents, attacking their nervous systems from the inside. Squad 8 had taken cover behind what appeared to be a farming vehicle. The vehicle exploded. In the first 30 seconds, over 200 Vrick soldiers were killed or disabled without ever seeing a human enemy. Then the colonists emerged. Thomas Okonkwo burst out of his root cellar like a demon from the old stories. His powered exoskeleton amplified his strength tenfold, and his targeting systems identified threats faster than any biological eye could process. He moved with the precision and speed of a much younger man, because the armor did not care how old its wearer was. He hit the nearest Vrick squad like a thunderbolt. His armored fist crushed the first soldier's helmet before the alien could react. His other hand drew a plasma cutter, officially designed for agricultural land clearing, and sliced through 2 more enemies in a single sweep. "Contact!" the Vrick squad leader screamed. "Human combatant in powered armor. Request immediate." Thomas killed him before he could finish the transmission. All around the colony, similar scenes were playing out. Elderly farmers revealed themselves to be trained killers. Agricultural equipment became weapons of war. Every building was a fortress. Every street corner was a kill zone. Yuki Tanaka walked calmly through the chaos, her medical coat flowing behind her. She did not carry a gun. She did not need one. Her medical nanites flowed out from emitters on her wrists. Invisible clouds of microscopic death that sought out Vrick soldiers and shut down their nervous systems with surgical precision. To the Vricks, she looked like a harmless old woman walking through a battlefield. Soldiers died silently around her, collapsing without visible cause. Their armor undamaged, but their bodies simply refusing to function. Medical nanites, she whispered, almost apologetically. They can heal so much damage, but they can also cause it. I'm sorry. I truly am. Sandra Oyeleran remained in her control center, coordinating the orbital defense network. A group of Vricks, dropships, tried to launch for a strafing run on the colony. Her satellites sent kinetic projectiles screaming down from orbit at 10 kilometers per second. The dropships were shredded before they could fire a single shot. That's 3 dropships down, she reported calmly, redirecting satellite coverage to Grid 7. We have a heavy squad trying to flank the medical center. The heavy squad never reached the medical center. They were intercepted by Marcus Webb and a team of former combat medics who were just as good at killing as they were at healing. Elena Vasquez moved like a shadow through the settlement, her intelligence operative training turning her into something almost invisible. She did not engage the Vricks directly. Instead, she disrupted their communications, sabotaged their equipment, planted false signals that sent squads into ambushes. In 2 minutes, the Vricks had lost 500 soldiers. Commander Thelvok watched from orbit as his tactical display turned from green to red. Squad after squad was being eliminated. His communication channels were filled with screaming, with desperate requests for support, with the sounds of his soldiers dying. What is happening? He demanded. These are supposed to be civilians. These are supposed to be farmers. Commander. Sub-Commander Rick said, his voice shaking. The humans are using military-grade equipment, powered armor, orbital weapons platforms, weaponized nanites. This colony is not what we thought it was. That's impossible. Our scans showed no military hardware. The hardware was disguised, Commander. Hidden. They were waiting for us. On the ground, the battle was turning into a slaughter. The Vricks were professional soldiers, well-trained and well-equipped. But they had been prepared to fight frightened civilians, not hardened combat veterans. They had expected to capture prisoners, not to fight for their lives. The shock of the ambush had broken their formations and shattered their morale. The colonists showed no mercy. They could not afford to. They were outnumbered. And if even a few Vricks survived to regroup, the entire colony could be at risk. So they fought with the cold efficiency of people who had spent decades learning how to kill. Thomas Okonkwo moved from target to target, his armor absorbing enemy fire, his weapons cutting down soldiers before they could react. He did not feel anger. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt only the cold, terrible focus that had kept him alive through a dozen wars. Behind him, other colonists were doing the same. Gray-haired grandmothers who moved with the precision of trained assassins. Elderly grandfathers whose hands never shook when they pulled a trigger. Retired veterans who had hoped they would never have to fight again but who had never forgotten how. At minute 4, over 1,000 Vrick soldiers were dead. The survivors had broken and scattered. Some tried to flee back to their dropships, only to find the ships destroyed by orbital fire. Some tried to surrender, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. The colonists accepted their surrender, quickly and efficiently binding them and moving them to secure locations. At minute 4 and 30 seconds, squad leader Keth found himself surrounded by 5 humans in mismatched armor. He had lost his weapon. His communication system was dead. His entire squad was gone. He raised his hands. Please, he said in broken human standard. I surrender. Please. An old human woman stepped forward. She had white hair and a kind face, and she was holding a medical kit. It's over, she said gently. The fighting is done. Let me see if you're injured. Keth stared at her in disbelief. 5 minutes ago, her people had been killing his comrades with terrifying efficiency. Now she was offering him medical care. He did not understand these humans at all. At minute 5, the battle was over. 1,143 Vrix soldiers were dead. 57 were wounded. The rest had surrendered. Human casualties. 12 minor injuries, mostly from friendly fire accidents. 0 deaths. In orbit, Commander Thelvok stared at his tactical display and felt his world collapsing around him. His invasion force had been completely destroyed in less time than it took to eat a meal. The weakest human colony had not just defeated his soldiers, it had annihilated them. On the ground, Thomas Okonkwo powered down his exoskeleton and sat heavily on a fallen log. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from memory, from the weight of all the killing he had done, today, and in years past. Yuki Tanaka sat beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. "I thought I was done with this. I really thought I was done." She put a hand on his shoulder. "We all did. But we did what we had to do. We protected our home. We protected our families." Thomas nodded slowly. She was right. He knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. Around them, the other colonists were securing prisoners, treating wounded enemies, restoring order to their damaged settlement. The battle was over. The invasion had failed, but Thomas knew that this was only the beginning. Commander Thelvok was still up there, with 12 warships that could destroy the entire colony from orbit. The real test was yet to come. He stood up and looked at the sky, at the ships that hung above his home like dark omens. "Now comes the hard part," he said. Commander Thelvok stood motionless on the bridge of his flagship. The tactical display before him showed nothing but red icons. Destroyed squads, lost dropships, communication channels that had gone permanently silent. In less than 5 minutes, he had lost almost his entire ground force. The bridge crew worked in terrified silence around him. Nobody wanted to speak. Nobody wanted to be the one to point out the obvious truth that they had just witnessed something impossible. Sub-Commander Rix finally broke the silence. "Commander, we have received reports from the survivors on the surface. The humans are offering them medical treatment and accepting their surrender. They are not executing prisoners." Thelvok said nothing. He was still processing what had happened. His mind refused to accept the evidence of his own sensors. Agricultural colonists had destroyed an elite Vrix invasion force in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. "Commander," Rix said again, more urgently, "what are your orders? Do we begin orbital bombardment?" Thelvok looked at the planet below. He could destroy the colony. His ships had enough firepower to turn the entire settlement into a smoking crater. It would be the sensible military response. It would erase the evidence of his failure. But his orders from the Dominion Council had been clear. Capture humans alive for study. Learn about this supposedly dangerous species. Bring back specimens and intelligence. If he destroyed the colony, he would return to the Dominion with nothing but death and failure. His career would be over. His family would be disgraced. Everything he had worked for would be ashes. "No bombardment," he said finally. "Not yet. First, I need to understand what happened. How did they defeat us?" Ryex pulled up the sensor recordings from the battle. The footage was incomplete, many of the helmet cameras having been destroyed along with their wearers. But there was enough to see the truth. The humans had been ready. They had known the attack was coming, and they had prepared. Hidden weapons, disguised defense systems, traps that had been waiting underground for decades. And the humans themselves had fought with the skill and precision of professional soldiers, despite their apparent age. "They knew," Thelvok said slowly. "They knew we were coming. Perhaps they always know," Rick suggested quietly. "Perhaps every human colony is prepared like this one." The thought was terrifying. The Vrix had been planning to expand into human space, to test these supposedly dangerous primates and prove they were not as fearsome as their reputation suggested. If every human colony was a fortress in disguise, if every human civilian was a trained warrior waiting to be awakened, then expansion into human territory would be impossible. "Contact the colony," Thelvok ordered. "I want to speak with their leader." On the surface of New Providence, Elena Vasquez received the communication request. She was standing in the middle of the settlement, surrounded by the aftermath of battle. Vrix prisoners were being escorted to temporary holding areas. Human colonists were checking on each other, making sure everyone was accounted for. Medical teams were treating the wounded, both human and Vrix. He wants to talk, she said to the others gathered around her. Probably deciding whether to glass us from orbit, Sandra observed. His ships have the firepower. If he was going to do that, he would have done it already, Thomas said. He's scared. He's confused. He doesn't understand what just happened. Elena nodded. Then let's help him understand. She accepted the communication link. Commander Thelvok's face appeared on her portable display. He looked older than he had an hour ago. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by something close to fear. Administrator Vasquez, he said. I want answers. Ask your questions, Commander. How? How did you do this? Our intelligence said you were a farming colony. No military. No defenses. Just old humans and children. Elena smiled sadly. Your intelligence was correct, Commander. We are a farming colony. We have no formal military garrison. Most of our population is elderly. Everything you learned about us was true. Then how did you destroy my invasion force in 5 minutes? Because, Commander, you made a mistake that many species make when they study humanity. You assumed that because we were farmers, we were not warriors. You assumed that because we were old, we were weak. You assumed that because we had no formal military, we could not fight. She paused to let the words sink in. Every human colony is like this one, she continued. Our elderly are not burdens. They are veterans. Our farmers learned to fight before they learned to plant. Our scientists were soldiers before they were researchers. We do not separate our civilian and military populations, Commander, because for humans, there is no separation. We are all survivors of Earth. We are all children of a world that tried to kill us every day of our existence. Combat is in our blood. It is in our bones. It is something we never forget, no matter how much we might want to. Thelvok was silent for a long moment. Why do you not conquer the galaxy? He finally asked. If your species is so dangerous, why do you not expand? Why do you not crush your enemies and take what you want? Because we have seen enough war to last 1,000 lifetimes, Elena said. We don't want to fight, Commander. We just want to grow our gardens and raise our families and be left in peace. But if someone threatens our homes, if someone threatens our children, then we remember who we are. We remember what we are capable of. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes hard. Your soldiers who surrendered will be returned to you. We have no interest in prisoners or trophies. We will treat their wounds and send them back to your ships, because we are not conquerors and we are not monsters. But I want you to understand something, Commander. If you choose to bombard this colony from orbit, you will succeed. You will kill us all, but it will not be a victory. It will be an admission that the Vrix Dominion could not defeat 3,000 elderly humans in a fair fight. And when the rest of humanity learns what happened here, they will come for you. Not because they want to, but because they have to. Thelvok felt a chill run through his cold blood. You would start a war over one small colony? We would end a war, Commander. Quickly and thoroughly. Humanity has spent centuries trying to leave our violent past behind. We have built peaceful colonies. We have focused on science and art and the simple pleasures of existence. But we have not forgotten how to fight. We have simply chosen not to. If you force us to choose differently, you will not survive the experience. The communication link was silent. Elena waited. On the bridge of his flagship, Thelvok made his decision. We will withdraw, he said. We will take our survivors and leave this system. I will report what happened here to the Dominion Council. What they do with that information is not my decision to make. That is wise, Commander. I have one more question, Administrator. Your colony was attacked without provocation. Your people were threatened with capture and study. By all the rules of warfare, you would be justified in demanding blood payment. Why are you letting us go? Elena thought about the question. She thought about all the Vrix soldiers who had died today. Young warriors following orders from leaders who had underestimated their enemy. She thought about her own people, who had killed efficiently and without hesitation because they had no other choice. Because we are tired, Commander, she said. Tired of killing. Tired of war. Tired of watching young soldiers die because their leaders made foolish decisions. Your warriors did not deserve to die today. They were simply following orders. If we kept them prisoner, if we demanded vengeance, It would not bring back the lives that were lost. It would only create more pain, more hatred, more war. She paused. Humanity learned long ago that victory is not the same as peace. We learned that enemies can become friends, and that mercy costs less than revenge. Your soldiers will go home to their families because that is what we would want for our own soldiers. We will remember this day, Commander, but we will not let it poison our future. Thelvok stared at her through the display screen. In his entire career, he had never encountered a species like this one, dangerous enough to destroy an invasion force in minutes, merciful enough to release the survivors without conditions, strong enough to threaten devastating retaliation, wise enough to prefer peace. I do not understand your species, he admitted. Very few do, Elena said. But perhaps you understand us a little better now than you did this morning. That is a start. She ended the communication. Around her, the colonists were watching. Thomas, Yuki, Sandra, Marcus, and all the others who had fought today. They were tired. They were shaken. But they were alive. And their home was safe. They're leaving. Sandra reported from her console. The Vrix fleet is breaking orbit. They're heading for the edge of the system. A cheer went up from the colonists. Some of them hugged each other. Others simply sat down where they stood, exhausted and relieved. Thomas Okonkwo did not cheer. He looked at the sky, at the ships that were slowly becoming distant points of light. It's not over, he said quietly. They'll report back to their council. They'll tell them what happened here. And then the Dominion will have to decide what to do about humanity. Hopefully they'll decide to leave us alone, Yuki said. Hopefully. But we should prepare for the alternative. Elena nodded. We'll send a message to Earth. Let them know what happened. The Terran Republic should be informed that the Vrix are probing our borders. Will they care? Sandra asked. They were planning to shut this colony down. We're not exactly a priority. They'll care now, Elena said. We just proved that even our smallest, weakest colony can defend itself. That's valuable information. That's a message that the Republic will want the galaxy to hear. She looked around at her people, at the elderly veterans who had fought one more battle and won. Let's get this place cleaned up, she said. We have wounded to tend and prisoners to release. And then I think we all need a very long rest. The colonists nodded and got to work. They had done what needed to be done. Now it was time to return to their gardens, their families, their quiet lives. But none of them would ever forget what had happened today, and none of them would ever be caught unprepared again. 3 months had passed since the Battle of New Providence. In that time, the story had spread across the galaxy through trade routes and diplomatic channels and whispered conversations in dark corners of distant space stations. The tale of how 3,000 elderly human farmers had destroyed an elite Vrix invasion force in less than 5 minutes. Some species refused to believe it. Surely it was propaganda, exaggeration, a story designed to frighten potential enemies. Humans were just another species. After all, they could not possibly be as dangerous as the rumors suggested. Others were not so certain. They had heard stories about Earth, about the death world that had produced humanity. They had heard about the endless wars humans had fought against each other and against the hostile environment of their home planet. They had seen the way humans survived and adapted, and refused to give up even in impossible situations. And now they had seen what happened when someone underestimated a human colony. On the Vrix homeworld, Commander Thelvok stood before the Dominion Council. The great chamber was filled with the most powerful leaders of Vrix society, ancient reptiles who had guided their species through centuries of expansion and conquest. Tell us again what happened, the High Chancellor demanded. Tell us exactly how your invasion force was defeated. Thelvok had told the story many times already. He was tired of telling it. But he stood straight and spoke clearly, because this might be the most important report he ever delivered. We arrived at the human colony of New Providence with 12 warships and 1,200 ground soldiers. He began. Our intelligence indicated that the colony was undefended. The population was approximately 3,000 humans, with an average age of 67 years. They were farmers, scientists, and retirees. They had no military garrison, no defense platforms, no combat vessels, and yet they destroyed your invasion force, the High Chancellor said. Yes, in 4 minutes and 53 seconds, to be precise. Thelvok activated the display screen behind him, showing the tactical recordings from the battle. Our soldiers landed in a standard encirclement pattern. They were expecting to capture frightened civilians. Instead, they found prepared defenses, hidden weapons, and a population that fought with the skill of professional soldiers. The council watched the footage in silence. They saw Vrick's warriors falling into concealed pits. They saw automated turrets emerging from disguised positions. They saw elderly humans in powered armor cutting through trained soldiers like they were nothing. The colonists were all combat veterans, Thelvok continued. Every single adult in that settlement had military experience. Some had been frontline soldiers. Some had been special forces operatives. Some had been things that even their own government does not officially acknowledge. They had retired to this remote colony hoping to live in peace, but they had never forgotten their training. And their weapons? A council member asked. Where did they get military-grade equipment? They brought it with them. Much of it was officially decommissioned decades ago, but the colonists had maintained it in secret. They disguised it as farming equipment, weather monitoring systems, geological research tools. When our soldiers landed, the colonists simply activated systems that had been waiting for years. The High Chancellor leaned forward. Are you telling us that every human colony is like this? That every human settlement is a hidden fortress? I am telling you what the human administrator told me, Thelvok said. She said that humans do not separate their civilian and military populations. She said that every human is a survivor of a death world. She said that combat is in their blood, and they never forget how to fight, no matter how much they might want to. The council chamber erupted in worried murmuring. This was not the report they had expected. They had authorized the New Providence expedition to prove that humanity was overrated, that the Death Worlder reputation was nothing but myth. Instead, they had received proof that the myths might actually be true. What do you recommend, Commander? The High Chancellor asked when the chamber had quieted. Thelvok took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been preparing for. This was the recommendation that might save his species from a catastrophic war. I recommend immediate diplomatic overtures to the Terran Republic, he said. I recommend that we propose trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual non-aggression treaties. I recommend that we treat humanity not as prey to be conquered, but as partners to be respected. You want us to make peace with the species that humiliated us? I want us to survive, Thelvok said bluntly. Council members, the colony we attacked was humanity's weakest, their smallest, most remote, most economically insignificant settlement, and they destroyed us in minutes. If we declare war on humanity, if we force them to fully mobilize, we will face a species of billions who have been fighting since before they discovered fire. We will face soldiers who have been trained from birth to survive impossible odds. We will face a civilization that has survived everything their own world threw at them and emerged stronger each time. He paused to let his words sink in. The human administrator offered us mercy, he continued. She returned our surviving soldiers without conditions. She asked for no tribute, no territory, no punishment. She said that humanity is tired of war and wants only to live in peace. I believe her. I believe that they have no desire to conquer us or destroy us. But I also believe that if we give them no choice, they will do exactly that. The High Chancellor was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. The Council will consider your recommendation, Commander. You are dismissed. Thelvok bowed and left the chamber. He had done all he could. The decision was now in the hands of leaders who were hopefully wiser than he had been. On the other side of the galaxy, on the quiet colony world of New Providence, Thomas Okonkwo worked in his garden. The tomatoes had come in beautifully, just as he had predicted. The beans were climbing their trellises. The vegetables he had planted before the invasion were thriving, completely unaware that a battle had been fought just meters away from their roots. His grandchildren played nearby, chasing each other through the rows of growing plants. They had been told that the drill was over, that everything was safe now. They were too young to understand what had really happened. Thomas hoped they would never have to learn. Beautiful day, a voice said behind him. He turned to see Elena Vasquez walking up the path to his garden. She looked more relaxed than she had in months. The lines of tension around her eyes had softened, and she carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had faced the worst and come through the other side. It is, Thomas agreed. I was just thinking about how strange it is. 3 months ago we were fighting for our lives, Today I'm worried about whether my tomatoes are getting enough water. That's the human condition, Elena said. We fight when we have to. Then we go back to living. She sat on a garden bench and watched the children play. I have news, she said. A Vrix diplomatic vessel is scheduled to arrive next month. The Dominion Council has accepted our offer of peace talks. It seems Commander Thelvok's report made an impression. Thomas nodded slowly. That's good. I hoped they would choose the smart path. They did. The Terran Republic is sending a proper diplomatic team to handle the negotiations. Apparently our little adventure has attracted some attention back home. They're even talking about reconsidering the colony shutdown. Turns out we're more valuable than they thought. Valuable because we proved we can defend ourselves. Valuable because we proved that humanity can be trusted not to abuse our power. Elena corrected. We could have demanded reparations. We could have taken prisoners. We could have asked for concessions that would have humiliated the Vrix for generations. Instead, we treated their soldiers with dignity and sent them home. That's the message that's spreading through the galaxy right now. Humanity is dangerous, yes, but humanity is also fair. Thomas thought about that. He had spent so many years trying to forget what he was capable of. He had come to New Providence hoping to bury his violent past and become something new. Instead, his past had found him, had forced him to become a soldier again. But perhaps that was not entirely a bad thing. Perhaps the galaxy needed to be reminded that humans could fight and choose not to. That strength and mercy could exist in the same hands. We should build a memorial, he said suddenly. Elena looked at him. For our people, for theirs, for the Vrix soldiers who died here. They were young. They were following orders. They didn't deserve what happened to them. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. I think that's a good idea. It will show the Vrix that we don't celebrate their deaths, that we wish it hadn't been necessary. Because it shouldn't have been necessary. If they had just left us alone, everyone who died that day would still be alive. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play in the garden. A month later, the memorial was complete. It stood in the colony's central square, a simple stone pillar with names carved into its surface. Vrix names, written in their own script, translated into human standard below. A plaque at the base read, "In memory of the soldiers who fell at New Providence. May their sacrifice remind us all that peace is worth more than pride." Thomas Okonkwo stood before the memorial as the first Vrix diplomatic vessel landed at the colony's small spaceport. He watched the alien dignitaries emerge, their scaled faces uncertain, their eyes scanning the settlement where so many of their warriors had died. One of the diplomats approached the memorial. He stood before it for a long time, reading the names, tracing the carved letters with one clawed finger. "You honor our dead," he said finally. "They were soldiers," Thomas replied. "They deserved better than to die in a pointless battle. We remember them so that future generations will understand the cost of war." The diplomat looked at him with eyes that held something like respect. "You are a strange species, humans. You kill with terrible efficiency, and then you mourn the enemies you have killed. That's what makes us dangerous," Thomas said. "We never become comfortable with killing. We never stop feeling the weight of it, and that weight is what keeps us from starting wars. We know what it costs. We know what we lose, even in victory." The diplomat nodded slowly. "Perhaps we have much to learn from each other." "Perhaps we do." Thomas returned to his garden that evening, as the diplomatic negotiations began in the community hall. His grandchildren had already been put to bed. The colony was quiet, peaceful, as if the battle 3 months ago had never happened. He knelt in the dirt and began weeding around his tomato plants. The work was simple and repetitive, exactly what he needed after a day of ceremonies and memories. Elena found him there an hour later. "The talks are going well," she said. The Vrix seemed genuinely interested in establishing peaceful relations. Commander Thelvok apparently gave them quite a detailed report about what happened here. "Good. I'm glad something positive came out of all this." "Thomas," she hesitated. "The Terran diplomats asked about you, about all of us. They want to understand how a colony of retirees could do what we did." Thomas looked up at her. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That we're just old soldiers who wanted to grow gardens and watch our grandchildren play. That we didn't want to fight. That we were just protecting our home. And they said that's exactly what makes humanity special. We don't have a warrior caste. We don't have a separate military population. Every human is a potential defender. Every settlement is a potential fortress. Not because we love war, but because we love peace too much to let anyone take it from us. Thomas stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. He looked around at the colony he had called home for 20 years, at the gardens and houses and the simple, peaceful life he had built here. "I'm getting too old for the other kind of diplomacy," he said. Elena smiled. "We all are. That's why we're so good at it." She turned and walked back toward the community hall. Thomas watched her go, then turned back to his garden. The tomatoes were thriving. The beans were climbing. Life was continuing, as it always did. Tomorrow there would be more negotiations, more discussions, more work to be done. But tonight, there was only the quiet satisfaction of tending growing things. Thomas Okonkwo, retired soldier, began to weed his garden. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the story of New Providence continued to spread. The tale of the weakest human colony that had faced an invasion and won. The tale of elderly farmers who had proven that humanity's reputation was not exaggeration, but simple truth. The tale of mercy offered to defeated enemies. The tale of peace chosen over vengeance. The tale of what it truly meant to be human,